It was a typical day at the office, and I was still trying to finish up my work before the weekend. My boss, Mr. Lockhart, walked into my office with that confident, almost intimidating air of someone used to getting what he wanted. He looked at me with those sharp, piercing eyes as if weighing me up. Then, out of nowhere, he made an offer that would change everything. "Emma," he began, his voice smooth yet carrying an undertone that sent a chill down my spine. "I'm willing to offer you $10 million. All you have to do is marry me." I blinked, unsure if I'd heard him correctly. "What?" I asked, my voice wavering. Mr. Lockhart continued, unfazed by my shock. "You'll pretend to be in love with me. We'll put on the perfect facade. I need to make my family believe that I'm happily married so that my mother and the daughter-in-law she's chosen for me leave. If you do this, you'll have $10 million. No strings attached, except for the role you'll play." His words hung in the air, heavy and cold. I felt my heart race. A million thoughts rushed through my mind. Why me? What did he want with me? I had no idea, but that $10 million seemed almost too good to refuse. I sat back in my chair, trying to process the absurdity of it all. This was crazy. Who offers someone $10 million just to get married? And to someone like me, who wasn't even remotely close to his social standing? But the more I thought about it, the more I realized I had no real choice. "What do you want me to do?" I asked, already knowing the answer. I could feel myself already agreeing, even though every instinct screamed at me that this was a terrible idea. "Simple," he replied with a glint in his eye. "Just act like a loving wife. We'll play the perfect couple, and I'll handle everything else. In return, you get the money. I'll even make sure you don't have to lift a finger after we get married." The offer felt like a trap, but the money was tempting. I thought about all the things I could do with that kind of money. My mind raced as I weighed the pros and cons. Could I really do this? Pretend to love someone like him? Someone I barely knew? But then, I thought about the consequences. What would happen if I turned him down? Could I really walk away from $10 million? I took a deep breath and finally nodded. "Okay," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I'll do it." Mr. Lockhart's lips curled into a small smile, and something in his eyes flickered, as if he had been waiting for me to say those exact words. "Good," he said, his tone cold but pleased. "We start tomorrow. No turning back." I stood there, feeling like a part of me had just been sold. But I couldn't help the rush of excitement that coursed through me. I just agreed to marry a man I barely knew for $10 million. What could possibly go wrong? The next morning, everything happened faster than I could process. Mr. Lockhart called me into his office, his demeanor as calm and collected as ever. "Emma," he said without preamble, "we're getting married today." I blinked, wondering if I'd misheard him. "What do you mean today?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady despite the sudden wave of panic. "I've already made the arrangements," he replied coolly. "We'll head to the courthouse this afternoon. The sooner we do this, the better." Just like that, it was decided. By the afternoon, I found myself sitting in the back of a black car, staring out the window, my mind a blur of confusion and disbelief. The world outside passed by in a daze, as I tried to wrap my head around the fact that in just a few hours I would be legally married to a man I barely knew. When we arrived at the courthouse, Mr. Lockhart was already waiting for me outside, looking as composed as ever. He was dressed in a sharp suit, his dark hair perfectly in place, the same indifference in his gaze. We walked through the doors of the courthouse like we were just another couple in a hurry to sign some paperwork. The process was smooth, almost too smooth. We filled out the forms, exchanged a few words with the clerk, and within less than an hour, we were officially husband and wife. I couldn't believe it. The certificate felt like a piece of paper that had no real meaning, nothing more than a formality. It wasn't like we'd exchanged vows or made any promises. I hadn't even felt the rush of emotion that usually accompanies a wedding. Yet here I was, wearing a ring on my finger, and my new husband, Mr. Lockhart, stood next to me, as if this was just another business transaction. As we left the courthouse, he glanced at me and offered a small, almost imperceptible smile. There, all done. I nodded, trying to swallow the lump in my throat. Everything felt surreal. I was now married to a man who wasn't in love with me, and who I wasn't in love with either. But there was something about Mr. Lockhart that I couldn't ignore. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was something else, something magnetic. His presence had a weight to it, pulling me in without me even realizing it. Even now, as we walked back to the car, I could feel the quiet force of his personality tugging at me. Despite the lack of warmth between us, despite everything being so calculated and businesslike, there was a certain charm about him. I wasn't sure if it was his confidence, his commanding aura, or something else entirely, but I couldn't deny it. I was drawn to him. And for the first time, I found myself wondering if this arrangement might turn into something more. But as soon as the thought crossed my mind, I pushed it away. This wasn't about love. This was a transaction, and I was simply playing my part. We got into the car, and Mr. Lockhart glanced at me again, his eyes unreadable. "You did well," he said quietly. I nodded, unsure of how to respond. "Thank you," I said, though I wasn't sure what I was thanking him for. The ride back to his mansion was filled with silence. I couldn't help but wonder what he was thinking. Was he as unaffected as he seemed, or was there something more going on behind those cool, guarded eyes? We arrived at his house, and he led me inside without a word. I was now officially a part of his world, but I felt more like an outsider than ever before. I had no idea what the future held for us, but one thing was certain. I was in way deeper than I'd ever intended to be. And the more I tried to distance myself from the reality of what was happening, the more I found myself thinking about Mr. Lockhart. Was this just a game for him, or was he starting to feel something too? I wasn't sure, but as I looked at him, his face calm and unreadable, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was playing with fire, and I was getting dangerously close to burning myself. It had only been a few days since the wedding, but Mr. Lockhart wasted no time in taking me to meet his family. I didn't have much say in the matter. This was part of the deal, after all. He'd made it clear from the start that I needed to play the role of his devoted wife, and that included facing his family. We drove to a grand house on the outskirts of the city, nestled behind a tall gate that seemed to separate it from the rest of the world. As we pulled up to the driveway, I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. This wasn't just a visit. This was the beginning of something much bigger. Mr. Lockhart didn't seem nervous at all. He got out of the car, adjusted his suit, and offered me his arm without a word. I took it, trying to steady my nerves. The door to the house opened before we could even knock. A woman stood there, her posture straight and her expression cold. She was in her mid-50s with sharp features that seemed to reflect the same iciness that radiated from her. Her gaze swept over me, and for a moment I felt like I was being sized up. "Mother," Mr. Lockhart greeted her with a stiff smile. "This is Emma, my wife." I tried to smile back, but her cold stare made it feel like I was in the presence of a stranger, not someone's mother. She gave a curt nod, her eyes narrowing slightly as she glanced at me. "I see," she said, her voice cool. "Welcome." That was it. No warmth, no welcoming embrace. I'd expected some form of greeting, even a fake smile, but there was nothing. It was as if I was invisible, or worse, irrelevant. We entered the house, and I could feel the tension hanging in the air like a thick fog. The walls were adorned with expensive paintings, the furniture all sleek and modern, yet the atmosphere felt cold, sterile. It wasn't the type of home where you'd expect to feel welcomed. It was more of a display, a perfect example of wealth and status, but nothing more. As we walked through the house, I noticed a few family pictures hanging on the walls. In one, Mr. Lockhart was a young boy, standing beside his mother with a woman I didn't recognize. His eyes were warm and full of life in the picture, but there was no warmth in his mother's gaze. "Emma," Mr. Lockhart said, breaking my focus. "This is my father's study." We entered a large, dimly lit room filled with old books and heavy wooden furniture. But again, there was no sense of comfort here, only a sense of authority and control. His mother followed us in, her steps echoing across the marble floors. "Sit down, Emma," she said, her voice carrying no hint of affection. "We'll have some tea. I'm sure you must be tired from your travels." I sat down, trying to make myself as small as possible, but every instinct in me screamed to get out of this place. It was suffocating, the silence almost deafening. As we waited for tea, I couldn't help but notice the way Mr. Lockhart's mother kept glancing at him. Her eyes weren't just cold, they were filled with something darker. Disappointment? Resentment? I wasn't sure, but I could feel the underlying tension between them, like a storm waiting to break. Mr. Lockhart, however, acted as if everything was perfectly normal. He didn't seem fazed by his mother's aloofness or her strange behavior. He poured the tea, offered a few polite words, and did his best to maintain the appearance of a happy family. But as the minutes passed, I started to see it more clearly. This wasn't just a cold family dynamic. There was something deeper at play here, something buried beneath the surface. Mr. Lockhart and his mother were not simply distant, they were at odds. It wasn't just the usual mother-son tension. It felt like there was an unspoken conflict, something unresolved between them. His mother's disapproval was palpable, and I realized then that my role here wasn't just to pretend to be his wife. It was to help maintain this facade, to keep up appearances, to keep his family at bay while he navigated this minefield of unresolved emotions. After what felt like an eternity, Mr. Lockhart's mother finally stood up. "Well," she said, her voice cold again, "I trust you two will be happy together. But remember, Emma, this is only the beginning. You have a long way to go." With that, she turned on her heel and walked out, leaving us alone. I glanced at Mr. Lockhart, who remained silent. The weight of the situation was crushing. This wasn't just about the money or the arrangement anymore. It was about his family, about a divide that I couldn't begin to understand. We left the room, and as we stepped outside into the quiet of the evening, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. But there was also something else, a creeping realization that this marriage, this family, was far more complicated than I'd ever imagined. The moment we were in the car, Mr. Lockhart didn't say a word. But as we drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just witnessed something I wasn't meant to see. The cracks in the perfect facade he'd spent so long building. The days that followed our visit to Mr. Lockhart's family home were filled with tension. I could sense it in the air every time we spoke, in the quiet moments that hung between us. Mr. Lockhart seemed distant, even more so than usual. He rarely spoke about his family, and when he did, his words were clipped, his tone colder than I'd ever heard before. I had assumed his aloofness was part of his personality. After all, he had always been a man of few words. But now, I realized that something deeper was at play. His relationship with his mother wasn't just strained, it was suffocating. I had seen it in the way she had looked at him, with a coldness that went beyond disapproval. It was as if she was trying to control him, to hold him back in some way. The pressure from his family was mounting. Every day he received phone calls from his mother, short, curt exchanges that he always ended with a sigh, his frustration barely hidden. The tension between them was palpable, but he never let it show in front of me. Instead, he became more withdrawn, retreating into his work and keeping his emotions tightly locked away. One evening, after a particularly tense phone call, I found myself sitting next to him in the living room, unsure of what to say. He had been staring at the same spot on the wall for what felt like an eternity, his jaw clenched in anger. Finally, I spoke. "Mr. Lockhart?" I began tentatively. "Is everything okay? You seem different." He didn't look at me right away, but when he did, there was something in his eyes, something raw and vulnerable. "It's nothing," he muttered, his voice strained. "Just family matters." I wanted to press him, to ask him about the tension I could feel in the air, but I didn't. I wasn't sure if I even had the right to. After all, our marriage was supposed to be a business arrangement, a contract with no emotional ties. But over time, I found myself watching him more closely, listening to the subtle ways he spoke about his family, particularly his mother. He never went into detail, but there were fleeting moments when he let his guard down, like when we sat together at dinner, and he casually mentioned how his mother had once forced him to follow a path he hadn't chosen, or when he muttered under his breath about how she had never once shown any real affection toward him. Each time, I felt a little more sympathy for him. It was clear that he had been hurt deeply, that the man I was living with wasn't just the cold, calculating businessman I had initially thought. He was someone who had been shaped by years of emotional neglect, someone who had learned to protect himself by building walls around his heart. I began to understand why he acted the way he did, why he kept everyone at arm's length, why he never allowed anyone to get too close. He didn't know how to trust, didn't know how to love without fear of being hurt again. It wasn't just his mother that had hurt him. It was the whole world, and he had learned to shut it all out. But even as I understood him more, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was still an outsider in his life. He had shown me a glimpse of his vulnerability, but only just enough to make me curious. He still kept his distance, still held a part of himself back from me. I felt myself becoming more and more emotionally involved. Every time I saw him retreat into himself, every time I watched him struggle with his past, I felt a pang of sympathy and something more. I wasn't just pretending anymore. I was beginning to care for him. But I couldn't let myself forget the reality of our situation. This marriage, this life we were leading, was nothing more than a contract. I had agreed to it because of the money, and I couldn't lose sight of that. I had to remain detached. It was getting harder, though. The more I saw of him, the more I began to feel something real. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was something. And I couldn't help but wonder if he felt it too, if he was starting to see me as more than just the woman who had agreed to marry him for financial gain. The internal conflict was tearing me apart. I wanted to be there for him, to help him heal from the wounds that his family had inflicted upon him. But I also knew that I couldn't afford to get too close. I wasn't sure how much longer I could keep up the act. It had been a week since we moved into our new apartment, and already things were beginning to spiral out of control. The phone calls from his mother became more frequent, each one more forceful and demanding than the last. Mr. Lockhart never picked up when she called, but it was clear that the pressure was building, both on him and on me. One afternoon, after a particularly tense silence between us, he finally spoke. "I'm going to handle this, Emma. I'll make sure she understands." I could hear the strain in his voice. The coldness he'd so carefully built around himself was starting to crack. He had always been the one in control, but now it seemed like he was losing his grip. I had just finished unpacking a box when the phone rang. Mr. Lockhart didn't move to answer it, but I could see the familiar tension in his shoulders. His mother had been calling nonstop for the past few days, and as usual, he wouldn't take her calls. I glanced over at him, unsure of what to say. He caught my gaze and shook his head. "She'll be angry. But I'm not going to back down this time. I'm not doing what she wants. Not anymore." I didn't speak. I had already seen the way she treated him. The way she had looked at him during our visit to the family home had been full of disdain, as though he were still the little boy she could control. I couldn't blame him for wanting to break free. That evening, Mr. Lockhart was unusually quiet. I could feel the storm brewing. And then, just as I suspected, the phone call came. It was from his mother. "I'm not going to take your calls anymore, Mother," he said bluntly before hanging up. But even as he set the phone down, I could see the way his jaw tightened. His mother had crossed a line. The anger simmering beneath the surface was impossible to ignore now. "I'll be packing my things," he said suddenly, standing up and walking toward the door. "We're moving again." I watched him, confused. "What? What do you mean?" "We're leaving this place," he replied firmly, his tone brokering no argument. "I've had enough of her, enough of this. I won't let her control my life any longer. We're moving into a new apartment, away from all this chaos. It's the only way to stop her from tearing everything apart." I didn't know what to say. The conflict between Mr. Lockhart and his mother had escalated to a point where it felt like there was no way out. He had been trapped in her web for so long, and now he was finally standing up to her. But I knew that standing up to her wouldn't be enough to make her back off. She would never accept me, and I could feel it, deep in my bones. I wasn't part of her plan, and I never would be. But still, Mr. Lockhart had chosen me over her. He was risking everything to be with me. The decision was made, and the next day we packed up our things and moved into a new apartment. It wasn't grand or luxurious, but it was a fresh start, away from his family's influence. The weight of the world seemed to lift off his shoulders the moment we stepped through the door. For the first time since I'd married him, Mr. Lockhart seemed free. He was no longer shackled by the constant pressure of his family's expectations. As for me, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Part of me was relieved, knowing we had escaped the suffocating presence of his mother. But there was also a deeper feeling that I couldn't quite place, something more complicated than just relief. Despite everything, despite the fact that our marriage was still a contract, I couldn't ignore the growing connection I felt with him. His strength, his defiance against his mother, made me admire him more than I cared to admit. That evening, as we settled into our new home, I found myself standing beside him, watching him finally relax for the first time in days. "I don't know how to thank you, Emma," he said quietly, his voice softer than I had ever heard it before. "You've stood by me through all of this, even when I've been difficult." I looked at him, a small smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. "You don't have to thank me," I replied. "We're in this together, remember? And even though I knew our marriage was still a charade, something inside me stirred at the idea of standing by his side. We weren't just playing roles anymore. We had both crossed a line, and I wasn't sure I could go back. It had been a few weeks since we moved into our new apartment, and the quiet was almost unbearable. There were no more phone calls from his mother, no more demands, no more tension hanging over us like a dark cloud. For the first time since we'd gotten married, there was a sense of normalcy in our lives. But it wasn't just peace that I was feeling. It was something deeper, something I hadn't expected. I had started to notice it more and more lately, the way I found myself looking at Mr. Lockhart when he wasn't paying attention, the way my heart would race when he spoke to me, even if it was just about something trivial. I told myself it was all part of the arrangement, that it was just part of the game we were playing. But deep down I knew the truth. I was falling in love with him. It was absurd, really. Our marriage had never been about love. We had agreed to this for money, for convenience. And yet, as the days passed, I found myself caring for him more than I ever thought possible. His quiet strength, the way he seemed to always protect me, even when he didn't have to, made me admire him in a way that went beyond just playing the role of a wife. He wasn't just the man who had offered me $10 million anymore. He was someone I genuinely cared about. But that realization only made everything harder. How could I love him when our marriage was built on a lie? How could I let myself fall deeper into a relationship that was never meant to be real? I had promised myself from the beginning that I would stay detached, that I would keep my emotions in check. But now, every time I looked at him, my resolve was crumbling. I had to admit I was scared. Scared that if I let myself fall any further, I'd lose control. Scared that if I let myself love him, it would destroy everything. What if he didn't feel the same way? What if he was just using me, the same way I was using him? After all, to him, this marriage was nothing more than a business arrangement. That was all it ever was. One night, after dinner, I found myself sitting on the couch, staring at the glass of wine in my hand, lost in thought. Mr. Lockhart had been unusually quiet all evening, absorbed in his thoughts. He hadn't said much since we'd sat down to eat, and I could tell something was weighing on him. But I couldn't bring myself to ask. I was too caught up in my own emotions. Finally, he broke the silence. "Emma," he said, his voice calm but with an edge of something I couldn't place. "Are you okay?" I looked up at him, surprised. "What do you mean?" "You've been distant lately," he continued, his gaze softening. "You're not like you usually are. Is everything all right?" The words stung. He noticed. Of course he noticed. But why should I be surprised? Mr. Lockhart always seemed to notice everything. But I couldn't tell him the truth. I couldn't tell him that my feelings for him were no longer just part of the act. I couldn't tell him that I was falling in love with him, because how could I? What if he didn't feel the same? "I'm fine," I lied, forcing a smile. "Just tired, I guess." He studied me for a moment, his eyes narrowing slightly, but he didn't press further. He simply nodded and looked away, returning to his work. But I could see the conflict in his eyes. I could feel it in the air between us, something unspoken, something neither of us wanted to acknowledge. I felt a pang in my chest as I watched him, that familiar ache in my heart. There it was again, the way he seemed so distant, like he was holding something back. I couldn't figure him out. Sometimes he seemed to care. Other times, he acted like I was just a convenience, someone to fill a role, nothing more. It wasn't that he was cruel or unkind. Far from it. But he was guarded, emotionally closed off. And I couldn't help but wonder if he was feeling the same thing I was. Or if he had simply become so used to living behind a wall that he couldn't let anyone in, not even me. As the night went on, I found myself lying awake, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. How much longer could I keep pretending? How much longer could I keep this distance between us? Was I just setting myself up for heartbreak? Or worse, was I already in too deep? I wanted to ask him how he felt, but the words stuck in my throat. I was scared of what I might hear. What if he didn't feel anything? What if this was all just a game to him? The thought made my chest tighten, and I rolled over, burying my face in my pillow, trying to push the thoughts out of my head. But deep down, I knew the truth. I was already in love with him, and no matter how hard I tried to deny it, it wasn't something I could just turn off. I was trapped. It was late one evening when it happened. I had just finished cleaning up the kitchen after dinner when I heard the sound of Mr. Lockhart's voice, quiet, almost hesitant, coming from the living room. I paused, my hand still gripping the edge of the counter, unsure of what to do. He had always been the composed, stoic figure, never letting anyone see what was beneath the surface. But tonight was different. "Emma," he called, his voice low but insistent. "Come here. I need to talk to you." I set the dish down and walked into the living room, finding him sitting on the couch, his posture relaxed, but the tension in his shoulders betraying his calm demeanor. There was something in the way he was looking at me, something in his eyes that I couldn't quite place. I sat down beside him, trying to meet his gaze, but he was staring at the floor, his fingers tapping absent-mindedly on the armrest. There was a long silence before he finally spoke. "My mother," he started, his voice trailing off as if the words were difficult to say. He cleared his throat, then continued. "She's always been controlling. It's hard to explain. She had a plan for me, and that plan never included me choosing my own path." I stayed quiet, unsure of what to say. I had seen bits and pieces of his complicated relationship with her, but I had never heard him talk about it in such a direct way. The walls that usually surrounded him seemed to be crumbling, just a little bit. He exhaled deeply, leaning back into the couch, as if the weight of the words he was about to speak were too much for him to bear. You know, when I was younger, I was in love. I thought she would accept it, that she would accept her. His voice wavered slightly at the end of the sentence, and for the first time I saw a flicker of vulnerability in his eyes. Her name was Jessica, he said, almost to himself. I was a fool. I was so sure she was the one. But my mother, she had other plans. She told me, no, ordered me not to see her again. She didn't fit the image my mother had for me. Jessica wasn't the right social match. She wasn't the right type. So I let her go. I thought that's what I had to do, to please my mother, to make her proud. His voice cracked as he spoke, and I could see the pain in his eyes, the old wounds he had buried so deep. He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated by the flood of memories. I never stopped loving her, Emma, and I never stopped hating myself for letting her go. I've spent years convincing myself that it was the right decision, that it was the only way to avoid conflict. But now, I'm not so sure anymore. I felt my heart ache as I listened to him. Here was the man who had always been so distant, so cold, suddenly opening up in a way that made him seem so much more human, so much more vulnerable. His mother's control, his first love, the pain he had carried for so long, it all made sense now. All the walls he had built, all the emotional distance he maintained, it was because of the hurt he had endured. I never let anyone close after that, not truly. I never allowed myself to feel anything for anyone, not the way I felt for her. And when you came into my life, I thought this marriage was just another business deal. But then He stopped, his voice trailing off again as if the words he was searching for were too difficult to find. I could feel my own breath catch in my throat. He wasn't just talking about his past anymore. He was talking about me. For a long moment, we sat in silence. My mind was spinning, trying to process everything he had just shared with me. This man, who had seemed so untouchable, so closed off, had been carrying this pain for years. He had allowed himself to be controlled, to be manipulated by someone who should have loved him unconditionally. And now, as he spoke to me, I realized just how much that pain had shaped him, how much he was still carrying. I reached out without thinking, placing my hand gently on his. His eyes flickered up to mine, surprised by the touch, but he didn't pull away. I didn't know, I said softly. I didn't know any of this. I had no idea how much you've been through. He squeezed my hand, his grip firm, but still there was a sadness in his eyes. No one ever does. I don't let anyone see it. But now, I don't want to hide anymore. My heart was pounding in my chest. In that moment, everything shifted. All the walls he had built, all the emotional distance between us, it was suddenly gone. I could see the real him for the first time. The man who had been hurt, who had been broken, but was still trying to put the pieces of himself back together. And I realized then, without a doubt, that I wasn't just pretending anymore. I wasn't just playing a role in his life. I was in love with him. But as soon as the thought hit me, the reality of our situation crashed down on me. I couldn't ignore the truth. Our marriage was still a contract. This wasn't supposed to be real. I wasn't supposed to feel this way, but I did. I couldn't stop myself. And now, more than ever, I felt conflicted. Was it possible for something so complicated, so fragile, to turn into something real? Could we ever truly make this work, given everything we had been through and everything that still lay between us? I wasn't sure, but I knew one thing for certain. I was already in too deep. It started quietly enough, with an unexpected phone call from his mother. I could tell by the look on Mr. Lockhart's face that it wasn't good news. He hadn't answered the call, but the tension in the air was palpable, his hands tightening around the phone as he stared at it for a moment longer than necessary. "She's here," he said finally, his voice taut. "At the apartment." I felt my stomach drop. After everything, I had hoped we would be able to keep the peace, that the distance we had put between ourselves and his family would give us some respite. But I should have known it wouldn't be that simple. Within the hour, his mother and Jessica, his first love, arrived, just as determined as ever to break apart what we had. I could feel the storm building as we stood at the entrance, facing them. His mother's eyes swept over me with disdain, while Jessica, standing just behind her, shot me a glance that could cut through steel. The same cold, calculating look she had worn when Mr. Lockhart had been forced to choose between her and his family. "You still haven't learned, have you?" Mrs. Lockhart's voice was cold and filled with venom, but there was something else there too. Fear. Fear that her carefully constructed world was slipping away. "You're making a mistake, son. This marriage of yours is nothing but a foolish charade. You've let a woman manipulate you. You don't even know her. You've thrown everything away for her." I stood there silent, my heart pounding in my chest, trying to prepare for whatever was about to come. But Mr. Lockhart didn't flinch. He stood firm, his jaw tight, but his gaze never wavered. "I made my choice," he said, his voice steady, unwavering. "And I'm not going to change it. Emma is my wife. We're together, and that's how it will be." His mother scoffed. "You think she's the one? She's nothing more than a convenient distraction. You know that, don't you? She's here for the money. This was never real, and you know it." Her words stung, but I didn't let them show. I had heard enough of this kind of thing from her before. It was always the same: manipulation, control, and the belief that she could decide everything for him. But now Mr. Lockhart was standing up to her, and I couldn't help but admire him for it. "You don't know her," I finally spoke, my voice louder than I had intended. I turned to look at him, and for a moment he looked back at me, his eyes soft but full of resolve. "You don't know us." Mrs. Lockhart's eyes flicked between the two of us, her expression tightening. "You really think you can make this work? You think you're going to get away from me, from this family, with this woman? She will never be enough. She'll never fit into this world." The words cut deep, but I held my ground. I knew what I was getting into. I wasn't going to let her tear down what I had with Mr. Lockhart, not after everything we had been through. I had made a choice, just as he had, and I was going to stand by it. "Enough," Mr. Lockhart said, his voice now rising with an authority I had never heard before. It was calm, controlled, but the power behind it was undeniable. "I'm not going to let you keep manipulating me. I'm not going to let you tear apart what I've built with Emma. You've done enough damage. This is my life, and I'm going to live it on my own terms." The words hung in the air, a heavy silence following them. Mrs. Lockhart and Jessica stood there, stunned by the force of his declaration. And for the first time, I saw a side of Mr. Lockhart that I hadn't seen before. It was the side of him that had been buried beneath years of emotional repression, beneath the need to please everyone around him. But now, for the first time, he was speaking up for himself, and for me. "You've spent my entire life trying to control me, trying to force me to live up to your expectations," he continued, his gaze unwavering as he faced his mother. "But I'm done. I'm not your puppet anymore. I will not let you dictate my life, my choices, or my happiness. And Emma is a part of that. She is my choice." There was no turning back now. Mr. Lockhart had drawn the line in the sand, and he wasn't going to let anyone cross it. His mother and Jessica stood there, stunned by his words, unable to respond. "I'm not going anywhere," I said, finally finding my voice. "We're together, and nothing you say or do will change that." His mother, clearly furious, turned on her heel and stormed out of the apartment, Jessica following closely behind. The door slammed shut behind them, and the silence in the room was deafening. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. But then Mr. Lockhart turned to face me, and there was a look in his eyes that I had never seen before. It was a mixture of relief, gratitude, and something deeper, something that made my heart skip a beat. "You're with me," he said softly, almost as if he were confirming it for himself. "You really are." I nodded, my throat tightening with emotion. "Of course I am. I'm with you." And in that moment I realized that the walls between us had finally come down. The lies, the pretenses, the fear, it all faded into the background. We had confronted his past, his family, and now we were facing the future together. The days following the confrontation with Mr. Lockhart's mother were quieter than I had expected. For the first time in a long time, there was a sense of calm between us. The storm had passed, and though the aftermath of our family drama lingered in the air, there was a newfound clarity. We no longer had to keep up the pretenses. The facade that had held us together for so long was slowly starting to crumble, piece by piece. I noticed the change in Mr. Lockhart first. He seemed more at ease, less burdened by the weight of his family's expectations. He wasn't looking over his shoulder anymore, wasn't waiting for another phone call, another demand. It was as if, after all these years, he was finally free. He began to let down his guard around me. The cold, calculating exterior that had once defined him was softer now. He would smile at me, and it wasn't a forced smile anymore. It was real. The way he looked at me when we were alone, the small touches that weren't part of the act, the laughter that had once been rare and distant, it was all starting to feel like something more. And then there were the moments when we didn't have to say anything at all. We could simply be, sitting on the couch, sharing a meal, or even just walking around the city together. For the first time, it felt like we were truly partners. There was no contract between us anymore, just two people figuring out how to make this work. But in the quiet moments, when I allowed myself to reflect on everything, it became impossible to ignore the truth. I had fallen in love with him. I hadn't meant to. This was never supposed to be real. From the very beginning, I had told myself that I would keep my emotions in check, that this marriage was just a means to an end. But somewhere along the way, I had stopped pretending. I had stopped playing a role. I had started to love him, and I couldn't deny it any longer. It wasn't the way I had imagined it would be. Love wasn't supposed to be born out of a business arrangement, out of a contract. But there it was, undeniable, growing stronger with each passing day. The way he treated me, the way he cared for me, even in the smallest of gestures, it all added up. It wasn't just the occasional tenderness or the quiet moments of understanding. It was his willingness to stand up for me, to make me a priority in his life despite everything that had happened before. I had never felt this way before. I had always been careful with my heart, never letting anyone get too close. But with him, it was different. It felt like I had finally found the piece that had been missing from my life, even if I had been too afraid to admit it. And so that night, as we sat together on the balcony of our apartment, watching the city lights flicker below, I decided it was time to be honest with myself. The silence between us wasn't uncomfortable. It felt familiar, comforting. But there was something I had to say, something I had to admit, both to him and to myself. "Mr. Lockhart," I began, my voice steady but filled with the weight of what I was about to confess. "I need to tell you something." He turned to look at me, his expression soft, his gaze filled with curiosity. "What is it?" I took a deep breath, gathering my courage. "I didn't marry you for the money," I said, my words coming out clear and steady, though my heart was pounding in my chest. "I didn't marry you because it was a deal or an arrangement. I married you because I care about you, more than I ever thought possible." His eyes widened slightly, surprise flickering across his face, but he said nothing. I could feel the tension in the air, and for a moment I wasn't sure if he would say anything at all. But then he reached for my hand, his touch gentle but firm. "I know," he said, his voice low and filled with something I couldn't quite place. "I know, Emma. I've known for a while now. My heart skipped a beat. You have? He nodded, his thumb brushing lightly over the back of my hand. You may have started out playing a role, but I've seen how much you've changed, how much you've cared, and I care about you too, more than I ever expected, more than I thought was possible. I was speechless. The weight of his words sank in slowly, and I felt a warmth spread through me, as though a dam had broken, and all the emotions I had kept hidden were flooding out. It wasn't just him anymore. It was us, and it was real. I was afraid, he continued, his voice quieter now, afraid of feeling anything for you, because I didn't want to get hurt again. But I can't ignore it anymore. You've made me feel things I thought I had buried a long time ago. His words made my chest tighten. I never meant to make you feel that way, I whispered, my heart aching with the weight of everything we had been through. I know, he said, his smile warm but full of something deeper. But that's the thing about life, Emma. We don't always get to control it, and sometimes we end up feeling the things we never expected. I looked into his eyes, feeling the sincerity in his words. The walls between us, the barriers that had kept us apart for so long, were finally gone. We were no longer pretending. We were no longer trapped in a marriage that had started out as nothing more than a transaction. We were something real. Something that couldn't be explained by contracts or deals. And for the first time, I allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, this could be the beginning of something beautiful. The decision had been made. We were moving forward, leaving behind the family drama, the manipulation, and the past that had defined so much of our lives. The weight of the pressure that had once hung over us was finally lifted. No more hiding, no more pretending. Mr. Lockhart and I were starting fresh, and for the first time I felt truly hopeful about the future. We found a new apartment, one that was ours, away from the prying eyes of his family. It wasn't extravagant, but it was comfortable, peaceful, a place where we could build something real. We spent the days decorating, finding small pieces of ourselves in every corner of the space. For the first time, the apartment felt like home, a place where we could finally be ourselves without the shadow of expectations looming over us. I could see the change in Mr. Lockhart, too. The man who had once been so guarded, so afraid to show his true self, was beginning to soften. He smiled more often now. He laughed. And when he looked at me, there was a warmth in his eyes that had been absent for so long. It was as if he had finally let go of all the hurt and the fear that had held him captive for so many years. One evening, as we sat on the balcony, looking out over the city, he turned to me, his expression serious but filled with emotion. "Emma," he said softly, his voice low, "I can't begin to explain how much this means to me. I can't believe you stood by me through all of this, through everything with my family, the lies, the manipulation. You never wavered. You're the reason I'm able to do this. You're the reason I'm finally living for myself." His words hit me harder than I expected. I could feel the weight of his gratitude in every syllable. I wasn't just his wife anymore. I wasn't just part of a deal, part of a contract. I had become someone who truly mattered to him. And that realization filled me with more warmth than I ever thought possible. "I did it because I believe in us," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I believe in you, Mr. Lockhart. I believe in us." He smiled at me, a genuine smile that reached his eyes, the kind of smile I had only seen glimpses of before. "I'm just thankful you chose me. I don't think I could have made it through all of this without you." And in that moment, I knew. We had done it. We had made it through the storm. And now we were ready to move forward together, without the weight of our past dragging us down. Our relationship was no longer about obligation, no longer about survival. It was about love. It was about partnership. It was about choosing each other, not because we had to, but because we wanted to. As the days turned into weeks, we settled into our new life. We found joy in the small moments, cooking dinner together, watching movies on the couch, even just sitting in silence, knowing we were there for each other. We no longer had to hide our true selves from the world. We were free to be who we were, together. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could finally breathe. We had created something new, something beautiful. Our love was real now, no longer an illusion, no longer something born from a business arrangement. We had built it from the ground up, brick by brick, and it was stronger than anything I had ever imagined. There were still days when I thought about the past, the family issues, the manipulations, the lies. But they didn't define us anymore. We had a future now, and that future was ours to shape. We had left behind the shadows of our past, and in their place, we were creating something new. As I stood by his side, watching the city lights twinkle in the distance, I couldn't help but feel a sense of peace settle over me. This was it. This was our new beginning. And whatever came next, we would face it together, with love, with trust, and with the promise that our future would be filled with partnership, laughter, and a life that was finally our own.